AM radio, an op-ed column, and Fox News is not enough. I want a center-right nation to fight for its soul, and its soul is represented in the arts. Its soul is represented in a world in which media is everything. AM radio is the lowest form of communication. It's tinny, it's not robust, it's not Avatar. I want Avatar. I want the right to enter the world of media to the extent and invest in media the way that the left does.
The fake media is trying to silence us, but we will not let them, because the people know the truth. The fake media tried to stop us from going to the White House, but I'm president and they're not.
You're listening to the Curt Schilling Podcast, a Breitbart.com podcast. The podcast starts now. Here's Curt with today's headlines.
Lots to get to today. Great lineup today. We got some pretty disturbing stuff going on down at the border, even though the border is now taking a backseat to the media's latest frenzy, which is the meeting between the president and Vladimir Putin. And then Frances Martel will join us a little bit later. Some great stuff today, though. I think it's always prudent to look back and kind of remember what's going on or what's been going on and put it in context, because a lot of times, especially in politics, these people say things and do things, and they don't get held accountable for them. But I want you to listen to this particular soundbite from December in 2016.
The Russians can't change us or significantly weaken us. They are a smaller country. They are a weaker country. Their economy doesn't produce anything that anybody wants to buy except oil and gas and arms. They don't innovate. But they can impact us if we lose track of who we are. They can impact us if we abandon our values. Mr. Putin can weaken us just like he's trying to weaken Europe if we start buying into notions that it's okay to intimidate the press or lock up dissidents or discriminate against people because of their faith or what they look like.
Except for oil, gas, and arms. I mean, that's not like very much, right? But the fact of the matter is that this is all of this stuff going on around the Putin-Trump meetings is fake news. It really is. It's hysteria. It's self-generated hysteria. But remember, as these Democrats plot and scream and yell about a rigged election, remember forward-thinking words of one Hillary Clinton from September of 2016.
Are you willing to accept the outcome as the will of the voters? Secretary Clinton?
Well, I support our democracy. And sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. But I certainly will support the outcome of this election. And I know Donald's trying very hard to plant doubts about it, but I hope the people out there understand this election's really up to you. It's not about us so much as it is about you and your families and the kind of country and future you want. So I sure hope you will get out and vote as though your future depended on it, because I think it does.
Mr. Quickly, the same question. Will you accept the outcome as the will of the voters?
I want to make America great again. We are a nation that is seriously troubled. We're losing our jobs. People are pouring into our country. The other day, we were deporting 800 people, and perhaps they passed the wrong button, they pressed the wrong button, or perhaps, worse than that, it was corruption. But these people that we were going to deport for good reason ended up becoming citizens. And it was 800, and now it turns out it might be 1,800, and they don't even know.
Will you accept
Look,
the outcome
here's
of
the
the election?
story. I want to make America great again. I'm going to be able to do it. I don't believe Hillary will. The answer is, if she wins, I will absolutely support her.
Not a small little note on the back side of that one about immigration. Did you guys catch that? 1,800 new voters by accident. They were actually supposed to be deported. But this next piece is pretty what's telling. This is less than a month before the election in October of 2016. I want you to listen to, and looking back on this, remember this. We now know that President Obama knew that the Russians were trying to hack into our election and hack into different facets of the election and trying to manipulate the election. We now know he knew that when he said this. Listen to this.
Donald Trump's aides say he spent part of his morning prepping for this final face-off. As we learned late tonight, he's expected to bring President Obama's half-brother as one of his guests here to Vegas tomorrow, a signal everything is now on the table.
Donald Trump tonight complaining of corruption.
Voter fraud is all too common.
To President Obama, he's just complaining.
I'd advise Mr. Trump to stop whining and go try to make his case to get votes.
The president slamming Trump for his rhetoric about a rigged system.
I have never seen in my lifetime or in modern political history any presidential candidate trying to discredit the elections.
Even some Republicans like Marco Rubio agree Trump should stop stoking voter fraud fear in the face of overwhelming evidence our elections aren't rigged.
They even want to try and rig the election at the polling booths where so many cities are corrupt. And you see that.
Trump defiant and undaunted, 2 words that describe his final 3 weeks. Trailing Hillary Clinton, he's now trying to shake up the race by showing he can shake up Washington, proposing term limits for members of Congress. He's running against the establishment, but still chased by his own controversies, like an accusation of sexual misconduct against him from a former People magazine writer, not verified by NBC News and denied by Trump. The magazine today publishing the accounts of 5 people who say the writer told them what happened at the time, and another who says she was with the writer when they encountered Melania Trump later in New York.
It was not true. So how we could believe her? That never happened.
To turn the tide, Trump needs to rally his base to make sure they show up in 3 weeks.
Every time there's been open running room for Donald Trump, he doesn't advance the ball. Tomorrow night's his last chance.
In the audience as his guest tomorrow, the mother of Sean Smith, who blames Hillary Clinton for her son's death in the Benghazi attack. For Trump, a focus on Clinton's controversies instead of his own. Hallie Jackson, NBC News, Las Vegas.
Some things never change. You notice that unverified news story about sexual harassment? That was the only verification anybody had on record was people saying, no, it never happened. But stop whining. The election isn't rigged. Haven't we been saying that for 18 months? That was the president at the time. And then we're here today. President Trump and President Putin are going to meet and talk with a one-on-one meeting, although the entire world's upset that Vladimir Putin is going to be one-on-one with Donald Trump because they say apparently he's going to do some Jedi mind thing on him and change the world. But I want you to listen to somebody. Newt Gingrich is a smart guy, a really, really smart guy. He's been right a lot more than he's been wrong. But listen to Fox and Friends this morning from Newt talking about how you negotiate with Vladimir Putin.
I think he's pretty clear about what he would like to talk about. He sidestepped a couple of unpleasant questions in order to stay positive. I think he would like to create a good relationship, and we'll see if it's possible. I mean, I think there's you can do all you want to try to befriend somebody, but they've got to do their part too. And we have no idea yet what Putin really wants to do. Although I think the fact that he's agreed.
How many languages do you speak?
I think the very fact that he's willing to do an interview with Chris Wallace, for example, is a good sign. I think Putin thinks this is a moment for a charm offensive. He's going to try to be positive, and I think it'll be interesting to watch over the next few hours. This is a KGB agent. He was trained by the KGB. He had a very good career in the KGB. He deeply, deeply dislikes the United States and feels very bitter that we won the Cold War, and then we actually had the audacity to say we won it. So you have to deal with him as a guy who is every morning gets awake trying to figure out how to strengthen Russia and how to rebuild Russia. And I think the efforts to try to get him to be normal don't get you anywhere. What you have to do is say, this is who he is. Now, can we work things out given that that's true? And I think there have been times that we have sent all sorts of signals. I mean, the Obama red line, for example, in Syria, after which nothing happened. the way in which we tried to deal with Russia in the late part of the Bush administration, where we showed them no respect at all in the Balkans, and promptly they invaded the country of Georgia. I mean, these things, this is a guy who is very determined to recenter Russia as a major power, and I think Trump, by going and meeting with him, we'll see what happens, but I think Trump has a pretty good measure of how to deal with it.
I think he does too. Listen, this guy's not a politician, so there are things that he's not going to be adept at, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think he knows who President Putin is. I think he understands what he is. I think his advisors have made sure he's ready, and I don't know why liberals and Democrats don't understand this, but the world's a safer place if we're getting along with Russia, and by getting along, I mean not at each other's throats like we were during the Cold War, and that seems to me what the liberals and the Democrats in this world think is happening right now. Don't let them fool you. The whole, oh my God, they're meddling in our election thing is a joke. It's funny. It's not true. They've always been meddling in elections, just like we do. That's what governments do, unfortunately. But I want you to listen to the brainiacs at Meet the Press on NBC News yesterday, Amy Walter and Hugh Hewitt. It would be funny if it weren't true, but listen to them talk about the Trump and Putin meeting.
All right, I want to start the conversation for you guys off with just this Susan Glasser nugget from The New Yorker on Friday. Most experts I spoke with, she writes, Republican and Democrat alike, were resigned to Trump being outplayed by Putin, a view perhaps best summed up by a former State Department official. I'm afraid, he told me, that our guy here is like an amateur boxer going up against Muhammad Ali. Amy?
Well, we already heard from the ambassador that it's just a meeting, so it's not a summit already.
Hang on, we went from summit to meeting. At some point, he went down to detailed conversation.
Right. So already we know where this is. And let's face it, Putin has already won. It's not simply that the president's going over into his part of the world and having to sit down and one-on-one. But the fact is that after these indictments, what a president should be saying to everyone, not just to Putin, but to the American public writ large, Russia did this to divide us. Russia didn't do this simply to make sure somebody won and somebody lost. They did this to make sure that we lose trust in our political system and in our institutions. And that's not going to happen. We are America. We may be of different parties, we may have different views, but we are united in America, and that's what I'm going to go say to Vladimir Putin, that you cannot divide us. And he can't do that.
Hugh, why can't he?
I think he will. I actually have much more confidence in the president probably than anyone at this table because I take a long view. There have been 26 Soviet-American summits, 6 Russian-American summits.
Don't call a summit.
I know, but they call them whatever you want. The worst was Vienna in '61, but the second worst was President Obama in Seoul with Medvedev on the open mic in March of 2012 when he said, tell Vlad, give me some space. What happened after that? Snowden, Crimea, the fraught relationship the ambassador just referred to. We won't know for a year how this plays out, and I actually have much more confidence that Donald Trump will not be bullied and will not be seeking the approval of anyone because he doesn't seek the approval of anyone, ever.
I mean, it's just that easy. And by the way, put her comment, Russia is going to divide us, next to President Obama's comment of them being a smaller, weaker. Which one is it? When you play both sides of the fence like they do and they have done, you never ever lose an argument in your own mind. I'm the same. I don't think he's going to be bullied. I think it'll take time to see how this turns out, but I do believe that we'll see something. Hopefully we'll see something positive. I think if we don't see something positive, then it will be because President Trump doesn't believe he came there in good faith. But apparently President Putin will be sitting down with Chris Wallace later today and doing an interview, which should be interesting because Chris Wallace hates President Trump as much as any of the people on CNN do. So that'll be interesting as well. We got a good show today. Brandon Darby is going to join us. We're going to talk about a slew of stories coming out from the border that are, for some reason, not interesting to anyone anymore, other than the people at Breitbart who actually try and give you guys news about the stuff that's actually happening in the world. His Cartel Chronicles, there are stories that you just... It's not getting any better down there. And with the left looking to abolish ICE, these stories become even more insane when you think about the left's approach to this. And then Frances Martel, she's our national security editor. She's always joining me and has been for years. And someone who is in the know with a lot of people in a lot of places to comment around some of the amazing stuff that's going on and will go on post-meeting and what the goals are. What's a win? What does a win look like in this meeting for us? What does a what does she think is going to happen? We'll be back in just a minute with Brandon Darby from Breitbart, Texas.
Breitbart News Daily with Alex Marlow.
Why did we see some of the Republican kissing of Mark Zuckerberg that was taking place?
I called it kissing the ring because I felt like every single person practically had to kiss the ring of this guy, who wants to do nothing except get all those people out of office. So, bizarre behavior from the Republicans.
Breitbart News Daily, weekdays at 6 a.m. Eastern on SiriusXM Patriot 125.
You're listening to the Curt Schilling Podcast. Once again, here's Curt Schilling.
Welcome back, guys. Joining me now is a gentleman who has been on the front lines, and I don't say that sarcastically. He has been at the border for a couple years now. He is a man who runs and helps organize a thing here at Breitbart called the Cartel Chronicles, which kind of documents the day-to-day life of the border that the Democrats have been complaining about. Well, they're stopped now because of the Russian meeting. But he is Brandon Darby. Most of the time we talk, it's to talk about stuff no one else is reporting, but should be. I want to touch on a couple things. First off, the Gulf Cartel claimed another victim the other day, and this time it was a police officer again. It feels to me that the only place right now in the world more dangerous to be a police officer in the United States is Mexico, and I don't say that tongue-in-cheek. Judges, politicians, police officers seem to be at the top of the hit list for these cartels, with no one to put that in check. Is there any way that they can stop this, or do the cartels in Mexico truly run everything?
They run things. There are ways to stop it. We've gone into before, but in the short term, they have to send the Marines in. This is one of the things that a lot of Americans don't realize, that along the border, most of the regions along the border and most of the cities actually have the military in the city engaged in gun battles with the cartels. Cartels are not the mafia. They're not criminal groups who are running drugs. These are paramilitary, groups of people who are actually in political power, who have political power, who oftentimes have the mayor or the governor or others connected to them or working for them. So I don't think most Americans realize that there are territories along our border, most of the territories along our border with Mexico, where the Mexican government can't go in unless they have the military with them.
I want you to make sure people understand what you're saying, because I get it. I've seen the pictures. I get when you say they're armed, they're not just armed with firearms. They're armed as a military organization would be armed, with assault weapons. They have the ability to pull off and execute military-style tactics because they are armed as a military organization would arm its military.
That is correct. They're a military organization. They're the army. They're the military. So that they are there. They're not carrying pistols, doing police work. They're actually engaged in warfare with these paramilitary groups that we call cartels. We also call transnational criminal organizations. They control legitimate territory in Mexico, and the government can't go in unless the government has the military go in to get them or do something about it.
And a couple different things that concerns me. Number one, they're armed by people who have an unlimited budget. And that's a problem, especially when you talk about the fact that the Border Patrol and ICE aren't armed with an unlimited budget. So we're putting our people in harm's way, and we're doing so with the knowledge that they're going to be outgunned by the people that they're standing across the battlefield from. But there's a couple things that I want to mention. 10 migrants in a Mexican state at the Texas border were shot at. I understand, I guess as far as you can understand, why they take out cops and judges. They're trying to make sure that anybody against the system of the cartels is eliminated. They don't play games. But why the constant attacks and the constant terror on just the private citizen? Is that to keep – I mean, you look at what they're doing. Mexico, I would imagine their tourist industry has taken a beating because you're seeing a lot of attacks or different attacks in just small towns and vacation resorts against citizens. Are they trying to accomplish something, or have they accomplished something that we're not aware of?
Well, it depends. So when you're talking about the Sinaloa Federation or cartel groups that are aligned with them, they're generally not going to do things that affect people outside of the drug trade. They're gonna not directly, right? They're gonna try to avoid it. But some groups, when you're talking about the Jalisco cartel, New Generation cartel, when you're talking about which is a faction of Jalisco that broke away. When you're talking about Los Zetas or the Gulf Cartel, they are actually holding political power, so they control territory, and so they have to keep their populace in order. That's why, oftentimes when we talk about this, I say that we should declare not Mexican cartels as foreign terror orgs, but we should declare certain factions of certain cartels as foreign terror. They've actually crossed the line to being foreign terror orgs. They've crossed the line to warranting that terminology or that designation, because they do use terror. They do use sheer brutality to keep political power in some regions along our border and in some regions of Mexico.
I want to flip to another story. And again, Bob Price has done an amazing job, but it should be on the lead, on the front page of every single outlet in this country, because the story is just a small snippet of what the left is not seeing. A CBS News reporter, they were CBS News, David Bignod was down to Roma, Texas to cover a story about the Texas landowners down there who have gotten notices about a proposed border wall. They're shooting a segment along this river, and I find it amusing, but I'm going to read it. He was shocked to see a group of illegal immigrants making their way across the river in broad daylight, a few hundred yards from a U.S. Customs and Border Protection port of entry. He was even more shocked when a man with a two-way radio approached them and told them to leave. What was surprising for us is to see that this happened in broad daylight about 100 yards from the International Bridge, where there are dozens of Customs and Border Protection officers. He seemed shocked that CBP officers processing vehicles and pedestrian traffic on the bridge did not notice three people on a makeshift raft making their way from Mexico to Texas. He described being confronted by a man who he later called a scout. The scout is a person who likely works directly for the cartels that control all illegal crossings of humans and drugs in the Rio Grande. He says, while the reporter says he doesn't speak Spanish, the man's message was clearly understood. I look over toward him, and he's gesturing, essentially telling me to get out. He ends up saying to my producer and I, it's not safe here, and you need to go. I'll tell you, we were scared, he said. It was ominous to listen to him, and he clearly was letting us know that it was time to get out. Please explain to people that event that you just heard him talk about as being shocked and surprised and scared of probably happens on the magnitude of 100 to 1,000 times a day all along the border. And the fact that they're shocked and surprised by that, to me, is even probably the scariest part of that whole story.
It is the scariest part, and that's because left of center news outlets, which CBS is one of them, whether moderate left or not, left of center news outlets, left-leaning news outlets, do not report on the realities at the border. If they're going to report on the border, they're going to report on what happens to people who come illegally once they're in custody, but they're not going to report on the realities on the border or the other 95% of these people's journey. They're not reporting on the realities of the border. Beto O'Rourke, the Democrat challenging Ted Cruz, his direct quote, border is safe. Border is safe.
Right.
Stop saying it isn't. The border is safe. Obviously it isn't safe. But that's the line that they're going with. That's the line that the Democrats go with, and that's the line that the media, which are naturally in alignment with them, that's the line that they go with too. So CBS goes down there. It's something that we've reported on repeatedly, that the river's shallow, that the river can be crossed, that there's no physical barriers, that just because there's security at a port of entry doesn't mean there's security right next to it, that it's unsafe, that it's controlled by the cartel, and if you try to report there, they're going to threaten you, and if you don't leave, they'll kill you. We've reported that repeatedly.
Right.
So CBS decides to go down there, and they experience exactly what we told them they'd experience, and then they act like they're shocked about it.
Right.
It's kind of bizarre, but it shows that the CBS reporter and the editors and that team obviously don't read a variety of sources for the news. They obviously stay in an echo chamber, or they would have known that.
And that ultimately, to me, is the terrifying part of this, is that them being shocked and scared, an event that basically you've been telling them for over 2 years. We've been telling them through the Cartel Chronicles for over 2 years. And that's why that's so insanely dangerous. The omission is lying by omission is every bit as dangerous as any kind of lying. So, hey, Brandon, listen, always good to hear you. It's certainly been far too long. We'll catch up again soon. You stay safe, keep your head down, and keep doing what you guys do, man.
Okay, thank you.
Breitbart News Tonight with Joel Pollack and Rebecca Mansour.
The real thing that the left is angry about is they're like, how could you allow these Russian memes? Somebody saw a meme and then they decided they had to vote for Trump. Or it must have been fake news. And by fake news, they mean conservative websites. Come on. But this is what the left thinks. Fake news. And by fake news, what they mean is shut down Breitbart.
Breitbart News Tonight. Weeknights starting at 9 p.m. East on Sirius XM Patriot 125. We want to hear from you. Tweet the show at Garrick38. Once again, here's Curt Schilling.
Welcome back, guys. And joining me now is Breitbart National Security Editor Frances Martel. Hello, Frances. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
So I want to get a 50,000-foot look from you, first off, about your impressions going into this meeting between Putin and Trump. Give me your strategy and your thoughts and your approach from a U.S. perspective going in.
Sure. I think this is one of the few times in the past few years where there is actually a list of topics where Russia and the U.S. have overlapping interests. In particular, on the issue of Syria, the Syrian civil war, I think there's some mutual interest there in both the U.S. and Russia wanting to have an extended influence in Syria while also fighting jihadists. And on the issue of China, I think Russia has even more to lose from the rise of a belligerent China than the U.S. does. And so I think those are two topics where Trump and Putin can actually find some common ground. There are a bunch of other topics, of course, which I think they'll be discussing, from Ukraine to alleged election meddling. And those are topics where I don't think there's any agreement. There isn't even a good reason to talk about it because no one's going to convince the other side of anything. But they have to be discussed and they're on the agenda. But what I'm expecting is some agreement that Iran is a belligerent threat to both Russia and the United States in Syria, and an agreement that China, and particularly China's One Belt, One Road plan to dominate the world, is a threat to the United States and to Russia, and that there has to be some cooperation or both countries are going to suffer.
I'm trying to understand what the priorities would be on the other side of the negotiation. Number one, I think we vastly underestimate the threat China presents to Russia. They can say all they want about being friends, but there's no plan in the world where they both want each other to be a superpower. From a geographical perspective, it's a far bigger concern for Russia than it will ever be for the United States. That's the first one. And the second one is the Syria / ISIS / terrorist issue that's all over the Middle East. Yeah, it's come home, and we're dealing with it here. But the fact of the matter is Russia's on the front line of both those things. What would Russia be looking for from us in those situations?
Well, the biggest problem that Putin has, and it's been the biggest problem that he's had for years, is the Russian economy is stagnant. It's weak. It's weakened by sanctions. It's weakened by the fact that Russia is an international criminal state, and nobody wants to buy its natural gas or its oil. To the extent that it can sell it, it has to coerce countries into buying its product. So coming in, the first thing I want to do as Putin is find agreements where Russia can make more money. And so I'm going to come in and say, I want to negotiate with, I can bend the rules on XYZ thing. I think, for example, on the Syria situation, Russia and Iran have both been supporting Bashar al-Assad, but Iran is doing everything it can to sell its oil before the November 4th sanctions that Trump has promised. And the more Iranian oil is on the market, the less Russian oil is going to be bought. So I'm going to try to come in and get to an agreement where Russia is the prominent actor in Syria, and that diminishes Iran's role, but that also means Russia can sell more natural gas, sell more oil, make more money. And the same thing with China. I mean, the One Belt, One Road project is specifically targeting countries that are close to Russia. It's targeting Kazakhstan. It's targeting a lot of Central Asia. It's targeting post-Soviet states. And China's going in there and trying to build railways and ports that China will control, which means that if you're in Central Asia and you want to get to Russia, you're going to have to pay China. That's not good for Putin.
Right.
So I think there's going to be also some debate as to, what can Russia do to ensure that China's not going to overrun its neighborhood in a way that can also make the United States happy and possibly activate some policies on Trump's part that benefit Russia and diminish China's influence, especially in Central Asia and Eastern Europe.
If Putin is truly interested, and I think there's some interest in his level or on his side to help their economy, because he recognizes without a strong economy, it doesn't matter what he wants. Crimea, Georgia, the land and the countries that they have invaded or illegally walked into, is Putin, do you think he honestly would acquiesce to requests to do some things that might appear to be peaceful in that sense? I mean, because I argued, much like the Sudetenland in 1936 when Germany just rolled across it and Europe said, well, you just better not do it again. I don't look at that as penalty. I think that could be a place where Putin could concede. Because, listen, the Crimea doesn't make Russia a bigger, badder, better state. It just adds more people under their Iron Curtain. But I'm wondering if you think there's any movement on their end from that.
This is an issue where I think it's one of the most important issues because Putin has been the worst international criminal on this particular front. I mean, he's also committed crimes like violating the North Korea sanctions and that sort of thing. But this is the thing where no one can disagree that Russia has committed international crimes. It annexed and colonized Crimea. I don't think there's any flexibility there because if there's one thing that Putin has been very clear on is that his ideology is and his mission is based on the fact that he thinks that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the worst calamity of the 20th century, and he wants to rebuild the old Soviet Union. He may not be a communist, but he wants to rule all of that land. And everything he does, the end goal is to take more and more land. So if he comes to some agreements where he can sell more oil and gas and boost the economy, he's going to take all that money and pour it straight into attacking Georgia and Ukraine. That's the entire point. If you take that off the table, then there's nothing to negotiate for because he has no other objectives. So I don't think there's that much of there's nowhere where we can sort of get him to bend on that front. But what we can do is use those ambitions to contain China, because we can tell him, look, it's much more dangerous for the U.S. if China decides to colonize Ukraine through One Belt, One Road, and suddenly, there's a European country where if you want to use any train station there, you have to pay China money. That's obviously worse for the U.S. than having Russia there. So that's the kind of common ground I think that can be found. I don't think there's anything that anyone can do to convince Putin to withdraw from Ukraine or to stop harassing the Baltic states or any of the post-Soviet states.
That's going to be a problem then, I think, for Trump. I don't believe he's going to go in. I heard somebody comment, and I believe it. President Trump doesn't really care what anybody says or does or approves or doesn't approve of when it comes to trying. He's a pragmatist. He's a problem solver. And I think that getting us to I don't want to say common ground, because you can't be on common ground in very many instances with a country run by and with the ideology that Russia is run by. But I think the world is a safer place if we're at least sitting down at the same table and understanding where each other's at. I guess what I'm saying is I look at this Putin walking away from this meeting, and a win for him would be to strengthen Russia. And the way to strengthen Russia with President Trump in the room is to lift or get rid of some sanctions that are killing his economy. The only way he's going to get that, I believe, is by negotiating with a guy who we know now is probably one of the best negotiators in the world, and giving concessions, meaningful concessions. And I'm not sure that – here's the thing. When you don't own a lot and when you're poor, you don't have a lot to concede, Francis. And so when you think about that, what are his bargaining chips? He doesn't have many other than being a bully, Putin doesn't have a lot of bargaining chips from the standpoint, given what Trump comes to the table with.
Absolutely. And this is something I think that we on the right understand so much more than the left, in part because we were paying attention when Reagan was in office and we were paying attention when the Soviet Union collapsed. So we get that Russia's economy is in shambles. We get that it's a weak country. But people who weren't paying attention to its collapse think that Russia is just as much of a threat as China, and that's absurd. So like you said, I don't think Putin has a lot of concessions. And that's why he behaves so badly on the world stage. So a concession that he could give us, a quote-unquote concession, is if he stops violating the North Korea sanctions, if he stops buying North Korean oil, or selling helping North Korea sell oil. That's not a real concession because that would just be Russia acting like a normal country. But that's the kind of concessions that I think Putin is going to try to sell to President Trump, because that's what North Korea did, right? North Korea, Kim Jong-un came to the table and said, we will stop kidnapping Japanese people and kidnapping Americans, and then you lower the sanctions. And Pompeo came out and said, no, that's not a meaningful, you acting
right.
like a real country isn't a meaningful concession to the United States. You have to do that because that's international law. You don't have to do that to appease the United States. So I think that's what Trump's going to say. If Putin comes in and says, we want to lower sanctions, but what we'll do to help you is we'll stop violating the North Korea sanctions. We will, take it easy on invading the countries next door. We'll at least, keep it to, we won't straight up colonize things the way we did with Crimea anymore. I expect President Trump to say, no, you're going to do those things because that's the law. You don't have to do that. Right. That's not a concession. You're just abiding by the law. The same way, that's like someone trying to, like a criminal trying to get a plea deal and saying, well, I'll stop killing people if you just let me go. No, like you don't kill people because that's the law. So that's the sort of thing that's going to go on because, like you said, Russia doesn't have meaningful concessions to make. The big leverage it has is that a united U.S.-Russia front against China would be very powerful and would be a huge problem for Xi Jinping. So I think that's the way to go.
I also think that there's a very liberal approach by Putin in the sense that when you talk about him, you said he's going to do these things because it's a law. I don't think he holds himself to the same standards as the rest of the world. I do believe that he thinks that they are above any part of the law, and that's a problem. And that I don't know how you change that, but that has to change moving forward. And I'm anxious to see. I don't think there's anything but a positive outcome from this unless, there's a nuclear exchange immediately after the meeting. I think that whatever happens here, we will have a little bit better insight into what they're thinking. I don't expect the Jedi mind trick to happen and Trump to come out saying, all hail Mother Russia. But I also don't expect us to be, walking out with Theresa May hand in hand kind of kumbaya stuff. I expect it to be somewhere in the middle, I would expect. I'm hoping. Let me get your last take. What do you think comes out of this? If there's a tangible action item, what do you think it would be that would come out of this?
I think it would be some sort of organized effort on North Korea and China, and I think it would be excluding Iran from Syria. It would be a thawing or a freezing of relations between Iran and Russia because Iran's not useful to Russia anymore, and it's a direct competitor in the natural resources market. And having Russia come out and say, we will not tolerate Hezbollah in Syria, that would be a huge game changer. I think that would totally change the attitude towards that war because with ISIS, it used to be, we're all against ISIS. ISIS is mostly gone, and what's left is Hezbollah and these Shiite militias. So I think that's the most likely part. That and maybe some agreement on abiding by the North Korea sanctions. And if that happens, that's a big problem for China. I think the friendlier Putin and Trump are, the more worried Xi Jinping is going to be. So I'm hoping for something on the China front. I'm very confident that something's going to come out on the Syria front because Putin has nothing to lose there.
Frances, always a pleasure.
Thanks so much for having me.
Winners and losers today. Very, very simple, easy winner. The winner is going to be President Trump and President Putin sitting down at the same table. I don't think there's anything but a potential win. How big of a win, that remains to be seen. But I don't think that the two most militant, advanced next to China, countries, military in the world sitting at the same table can I don't think it can be a bad thing. So I'm absolutely looking forward to that. The loser is an easy one. I've never thought he was funny. I still think he's less funny. But Sacha Baron Cohen has made a show, Who is American, which he basically dresses up in costume and lies about who he is to get interviews he would never get. Apparently he duped Sarah Palin. Bernie Sanders, I haven't seen it. I won't see it. The only thing he's ever done was play Jean Girard to a T in Talladega Nights. Other than that, I think he's a fucking clown. He humiliates and takes pleasure in humiliating everyday Americans, and he gets some congressman and a gun lobbyist as well. I don't know who that is, but anyway, he's trash is what he is. And but hey, it was funny because funny, sad in the sense that apparently he made himself out to be a wounded warrior to interview Sarah Palin, and I called him out for stolen valor, and the idiots on the left said you can't commit stolen valor if you're from England. And I said, well, wait a minute. What the hell does where you come from have to do with stealing valor? You emulate a wounded warrior and you haven't ever served, that's stolen valor. I don't give a where you're from. So anyway, he wins it going away. Back tomorrow on the Curt Schilling Podcast with Sheriff David Clark.
Everything in hip-hop is not bad. Kanye agreed with us, so let's love him today until he raps tomorrow and you turn your back. Because if you jump off when the fun of the moment is over, then you are in fact making Kanye the token he is accused of being. So please, don't do that. Don't go there.
Sonny's Corner with Sonny Johnson, Saturday from 1 to 3 p.m. East on Sirius XM Patriot 125.